Have you ever felt like your entire world was built on a foundation you never questioned, only to discover that one moment, one encounter, could shatter everything you thought you knew? That's exactly what happened to me on a cold November afternoon, when I found a complete stranger weeping at my daughter's tomb. I'm Richard Harrington, and for 58 years, I believed I had life figured out. I built an empire from nothing, climbed every ladder, conquered every challenge that came my way. My name opens doors, commands respect, and appears on buildings across 3 states. But none of that mattered. None of it meant anything when I lost my daughter Emma 3 years ago. She was only 24, vibrant and full of life, studying medicine at Johns Hopkins, engaged to a promising young lawyer from a respectable family. She was my pride, my joy, the reason I worked those endless hours and made those ruthless business decisions. Everything I did for her future. Or so I told myself. The day she died in that car accident, something inside me died too. My wife Catherine and I, we never recovered. We went through the motions, attended the right events, smiled at the right people, but our home became a mausoleum long before we ever built Emma's actual tomb. We barely spoke anymore. What was there to say? Our only child was gone, and with her went any semblance of purpose or meaning in our carefully constructed lives. I visit Emma's grave every Sunday without fail. It's the one appointment I never miss, the one place where I don't have to pretend to be the strong, invincible Richard Harrington everyone expects. I can just be a broken father talking to his little girl, telling her about my week, asking her questions I'll never hear answered, apologizing for things I can never make right. That particular Sunday started like any other. The cemetery was quiet, peaceful, with golden leaves scattered across the manicured lawns. I was approaching Emma's tomb, a beautiful white marble structure I had commissioned from an Italian sculptor, engraved with her favorite quote from Maya Angelou. When I saw him, a young man couldn't have been more than 27 or 28, dressed in worn jeans and a faded jacket, kneeling in front of Emma's grave. His shoulders were shaking with sobs, his hands pressed against the cold marble as if trying to reach through it. My first reaction was anger. Who was this stranger? What right did he have to be at my daughter's grave? I felt violated, protective, outraged. This was our private place, our sacred space. I quickened my pace, ready to confront him, to demand answers, to throw him out if necessary. But then I saw the child, a little girl, no more than 2 years old, standing beside him, clutching his hand with one tiny fist while the other hand held a small bouquet of daisies, Emma's favorite flowers. The child had dark curls that caught the autumn sunlight, creating a halo effect around her cherubic face. She wasn't crying like the man. Instead, she was looking at the tomb with an expression of curious solemnity, as if she understood this was a place of importance, even if she couldn't quite grasp why. Something about her stopped me in my tracks. I stood there frozen about 20 feet away, my anger evaporating into confusion and an inexplicable feeling I couldn't name. The man was whispering something I couldn't hear, his voice breaking with emotion. The little girl tugged on his sleeve and he looked down at her, wiping his eyes hastily, trying to compose himself. That's when I stepped forward, my expensive leather shoes crunching on the gravel path. The man's head snapped up, his face pale with surprise and what looked like fear. His eyes were red-rimmed, swollen from crying, and there was such raw pain in them that it momentarily disarmed me. But it was the little girl who captured my complete attention. When she turned to look at me, I felt like I'd been struck by lightning. Those eyes, dear God, those eyes. They were the exact shade of emerald green that Emma had inherited from my mother. Not just similar, not just close, but identical in that rare, distinctive way that had made Emma's eyes unforgettable to everyone who met her. The shape of her face, the slight dimple in her left cheek, the way her lips curved even when she wasn't smiling. It was like looking at Emma as a toddler. I had thousands of photographs at home, albums and albums of Emma's childhood, and this child could have stepped right out of those pages. My heart began pounding so hard I thought I might collapse right there. Have you ever experienced a moment when reality seems to tilt on its axis? When everything you thought you understood suddenly becomes questionable? Comment below if you've ever had your world turned upside down in an instant, because that's exactly what happened to me in that cemetery. The young man scrambled to his feet, instinctively pulling the little girl behind him in a protective gesture that somehow felt both defensive and dignified. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harrington," he said, his voice hoarse from crying but steady enough. I didn't mean to intrude, we were just leaving. His knowledge of my identity didn't surprise me. My face had been in enough newspapers and business magazines over the years. What surprised me was the way he said my name with a mixture of respect, sadness, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Resentment, maybe? Or was it fear? Wait, I heard myself say, though my mind was racing too fast to form coherent thoughts. Who are you? How did you know my daughter? The man's jaw tightened and he glanced down at the child, who was now peeking around his legs to look at me with those impossibly familiar eyes. My name is Daniel Cooper, he said quietly, and I think you and I need to have a very difficult conversation, but not here, and not in front of Lily. Lily. The little girl's name was Lily. Something about hearing it made my chest constrict. Emma had always loved that name. She used to say that if she ever had a daughter, she'd name her Lily or Rose, something floral and gentle. I'd teased her about it, saying she'd probably end up with 3 boys who'd be named something strong like Alexander or Benjamin. She'd laughed and said time would tell, except time had run out for Emma, and she'd never have the chance to name her own children. Or had she? The thought that flashed through my mind was so impossible, so utterly inconceivable, that I immediately tried to dismiss it. But the evidence was standing right in front of me, holding a man's hand with one tiny fist and clutching wilted daisies with the other, looking at me with my dead daughter's eyes. How old is she? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel's face crumpled for just a second before he regained control. She just turned 2 last month, he said. October 15th. I did the math instantly, the way any businessman calculates numbers automatically. Emma had died in January 3 years ago. If this child was 2, born in October, that meant Emma would have been pregnant when she died. About 4 months pregnant. My mind reeled. That was impossible. Emma would have told us. She was engaged to Jonathan, planning a June wedding. If she'd been pregnant, it would have been a joyous announcement, something to celebrate, not hide, unless the child wasn't Jonathan's. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I actually staggered backward, reaching out to steady myself against a nearby headstone. This man, this Daniel Cooper with his worn clothes and working-class appearance, was standing at my daughter's grave with a child who looked exactly like Emma had looked as a toddler, a child who was born after Emma died, which meant Emma had been carrying this child when she crashed her car on that rain-slicked highway. She was pregnant, I said, not as a question but as a statement, each word tasting like ash in my mouth. Emma was pregnant when she died, and you're telling me that child is hers. Daniel's eyes filled with tears again, but he nodded. Yes, sir. The doctors were able to save Lily, even though they couldn't save Emma. It was a miracle, they said. A terrible, beautiful miracle. I got the call that I'd lost the woman I loved but gained a daughter in the same breath. I've been raising Lily alone for 2 years now, and every day she looks more like her mother. Every day I see Emma in her smile, her laugh, the way she scrunches her nose when she doesn't like something. The world was spinning. I couldn't breathe. Emma had been in love with someone else. Emma had been pregnant. Emma had a child who survived, and I knew nothing about any of it. Why didn't you tell me? I demanded, my voice rising despite my best efforts to control it. Why didn't anyone tell me I had a granddaughter? Do you have any idea what these past 3 years have been like? Do you have any concept of the hell my wife and I have been living through, thinking we'd lost everything, that Emma's entire existence had been erased from this world? Daniel flinched at my words, but he stood his ground. Emma made me promise, he said quietly. She made me swear that if anything ever happened to her, I wouldn't contact you or Mrs. Harrington. She said you'd never accept me, never accept us, that you'd try to take Lily away or buy me off or destroy me the way you destroyed other people who got in your way. Those were her words, Mr. Harrington, not mine. Each word was like a knife twisting in my gut. Is this who I was? Is this who my daughter had seen when she looked at me? A man so controlling, so ruthless, so consumed with status and appearance that his own child couldn't trust him with the truth about her life? I wanted to deny it, to rage against this characterization, but the words died in my throat because somewhere deep inside, I knew there was truth in what he was saying. I thought about the way I'd reacted when Emma had briefly dated a musician during her sophomore year of college. I'd made my disapproval abundantly clear, had even gone so far as to have my lawyers look into the young man's background, finding a minor drug possession charge from when he was 18 and using it to convince Emma he was unsuitable. She'd broken up with him shortly after, and I'd been pleased with myself for protecting her from what I considered a poor choice. Or the time she'd expressed interest in joining Doctors Without Borders after graduation, and I'd spent weeks explaining all the reasons that was a terrible idea, how she could do so much more good with the connections and resources our family name provided, how dangerous and foolish it would be to throw away her advantages for some idealistic notion of helping people in war zones. She'd eventually agreed to stay and complete her residency at a prestigious hospital I'd called in favors to get her into. Had I been protecting her? Or had I been controlling her? Had I been a loving father? Or had I been a tyrant who couldn't stand the thought of his daughter making her own choices? I'm not here to ask you for anything, Daniel continued, his voice stronger now. I have a decent job as a mechanic, and my mother helps with childcare. We're not rich, but Lily has everything she needs. She's happy, healthy, and loved beyond measure. I just wanted her to know where her mother rests, wanted to bring her here on her birthday like I do every year, to talk to Emma and tell her how amazing her daughter is becoming. I never expected to run into you. Lily tugged on Daniel's hand again, and he looked down at her. Daddy, can I put the flowers down now? She asked in that sweet, high voice that small children have. My arms are tired. Daddy. She called him Daddy. Of course she did. He'd been raising her alone for 2 years. He was the only parent she'd ever known. But hearing it felt like another loss, another thing that had been taken from me, another piece of Emma's life that I'd never be part of. Of course, sweetheart, Daniel said softly, and he helped her toddle forward to place the small bouquet of daisies at the base of Emma's tomb. The little girl patted the marble gently as if comforting it and whispered, "Love you, Mama in heaven." I couldn't hold back the sob that tore from my chest. This beautiful child, my granddaughter, Emma's daughter, had never known her mother except through stories and visits to a cemetery. Emma had never held her baby, never nursed her, never sung her lullabies or kissed her scraped knees or watched her take her first steps. All those moments, all those precious experiences that should have been Emma's, had been stolen by whatever circumstances had led to that car crash. And I'd been robbed too. Robbed of 2 years of this child's life, 2 years of watching her grow, of being the grandfather I'd always imagined I'd be someday. Have you ever felt anger and grief and regret all swirling together into something so overwhelming that you don't know whether to scream or cry or simply collapse? That's where I was standing in that cemetery, watching a stranger's daughter, my daughter's daughter, place flowers on a tomb while everything I thought I knew about my life crumbled around me. I cleared my throat, trying to regain some composure. Daniel, I said, and his name felt foreign on my tongue. I need to understand what happened. I need to know how my daughter ended up pregnant with your child without my wife or me having any knowledge of it. I need to know why she felt she couldn't tell us, couldn't trust us with something so important. Daniel looked at me for a long moment as if weighing whether I deserved the truth. Finally, he sighed. It's a long story, Mr. Harrington, and probably not one you want to hear standing in a cemetery with a 2-year-old present. But I'll tell you this much. Emma and I met 4 years ago when her car broke down on Route 40. I towed it to my shop and fixed it for her. She came back to pick it up, and we just started talking. About everything. Life, dreams, fears, the universe. She said it was the first real conversation she'd had in months, maybe years. We fell in love, Mr. Harrington. Not the society kind of love with fancy dates and expensive gifts. The real kind. The kind where you stay up all night talking about your childhood traumas and your biggest hopes and what scares you most about the future. The kind where you don't care that one of you is wealthy and the other is barely scraping by, because when you're together, none of that external stuff matters. His words painted a picture of my daughter that was both familiar and completely foreign. I knew Emma was thoughtful, intelligent, and kind, but I'd never considered that she might be lonely, that the life Catherine and I had built for her might feel hollow or suffocating. She kept our relationship secret for 6 months, Daniel continued. Then she told you she was seeing someone, and you had your investigators check me out. You told her I was unsuitable, that I was clearly after her money, that a mechanic could never understand or fit into her world. She defended me at first, told you that you were wrong about me, that what we had was real. But you're a very persuasive man, Mr. Harrington. You showed her statistics about cross-class marriages, articles about gold diggers, examples of other wealthy families torn apart by inappropriate relationships. You made her doubt herself, doubt me, doubt what we had. I remembered that conversation. I remembered sitting in my study with Emma, showing her the background check on Daniel Cooper that my investigator had compiled. 2-year community college degree, worked at an auto repair shop, lived in a modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood. Parents were a retired postal worker and a school cafeteria employee. Nothing criminal, nothing scandalous, just thoroughly, completely ordinary. Not what I'd envisioned for my daughter, who deserved someone of her own caliber. Someone who could match her intellectually, socially, financially. She broke up with me, Daniel said, his voice thick with remembered pain. Told me it couldn't work, that we were from different worlds, that it was better to end things before we got more invested. I was devastated, but I understood. I knew who you were, knew the kind of pressure she was under. I told her I loved her, and I'd wait if she ever changed her mind. But I wouldn't make things harder for her by fighting for something she didn't want. Lily had finished arranging her flowers and was now sitting on the grass, humming a little tune to herself while pulling up blades of grass. She seemed content, oblivious to the heavy conversation happening above her head. But Emma couldn't let go either, Daniel continued. 3 months later, she showed up at my apartment at midnight, crying, saying she'd made a terrible mistake. She'd gotten engaged to Jonathan like you wanted, started planning the perfect wedding, but she said she felt like she was suffocating, like she was playing a role in someone else's life. She said every time Jonathan kissed her, she thought of me. Every time she looked at wedding venues, she imagined what a simple ceremony with me would be like. She apologized for hurting me, for being weak, for not being brave enough to stand up to you from the start. I felt sick. While I'd been congratulating myself on steering Emma toward an appropriate match, she'd been dying inside. While Catherine and I had been planning engagement parties and discussing guest lists, our daughter had been pretending to be happy to please us. We started seeing each other in secret, Daniel said. I know it was wrong. Technically, she was engaged to someone else, but she promised she was going to break it off with Jonathan. She just needed time to figure out how to tell you both, how to stand up to you without destroying your relationship entirely. She was terrified of losing you, Mr. Harrington. For all her frustration with your control, she loved you desperately. She wanted your approval, your blessing, your acceptance of the life she wanted to live. She just didn't know how to get it. My hands were shaking. I shoved them into my coat pockets, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity while my entire understanding of my daughter's last years was being rewritten. Then she got pregnant, I said quietly. Daniel nodded. She was terrified but also happy. She saw it as a sign, a push she needed to finally be honest with everyone. She was going to break things off with Jonathan, tell you and Mrs. Harrington the truth about us, about the baby. She had it all planned out. She was going to do it the weekend after she came back from that medical conference in Baltimore. The conference, I remembered. Emma had driven herself, said she wanted the time alone to think. She'd seemed distracted that morning when she left, kept starting to say something and then stopping. I'd been in a hurry, had an important meeting, had barely paid attention. I'd kissed her forehead absently and told her to drive safely. Those were the last words I ever said to my daughter. Drive safely. What happened? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Why did she crash? Emma was an excellent driver, cautious to a fault. Daniel's face contorted with pain. Jonathan found out about us, he said quietly. I don't know how, whether someone saw us together or whether he went through her phone, but he confronted her while she was at the conference. Called her, said terrible things, threatened to tell you in the worst possible way, to destroy her reputation, to make sure you disowned her. Emma was driving back early, crying, trying to call me, but I was at work with my phone in the locker. She was upset, distracted, and it was raining. A truck hydroplaned in front of her, and she swerved. The crash wasn't instantly fatal, the paramedics told me. She was unconscious but alive when they got her to the hospital. But there was internal bleeding they couldn't stop, damage too severe to repair. They tried everything, but she died on the operating table. He stopped, swallowing hard, tears running freely down his face now. But before she died, they realized she was pregnant. They did an emergency C-section, delivered Lily 15 weeks premature. She was tiny, barely over a pound, with lungs that weren't ready to breathe and a heart that had to fight to keep beating. They told me she probably wouldn't survive the night, but she did. Night after night, week after week, month after month, Lily fought like her mother would have fought. She spent 3 months in the NICU, had 2 surgeries, coded twice, but she survived. My little miracle. I was crying now, too. Not caring how it looked. Not caring about maintaining the strong, controlled image I'd spent a lifetime cultivating. My daughter had died heartbroken and afraid, thinking her father would disown her, carrying a baby she'd wanted to celebrate but had been too scared to announce. And that baby, against all odds, had lived, had fought and survived and grown into this beautiful little girl sitting in the grass singing to herself, completely unaware that she'd been born from tragedy but represented something miraculous. "I didn't tell you," Daniel said, his voice barely a whisper now, "because Emma had made me promise, and because I was angry. Angry at you for being the kind of father she had to hide from. Angry at Jonathan for whatever he said that left her so upset she couldn't drive safely. Angry at myself for not answering my phone, for not being there when she needed me. Angry at God for taking her and leaving me to raise our daughter alone. But mostly, I was scared. Scared that you'd try to take Lily from me. Scared that with your money and your lawyers and your power you could prove I was unfit or unsuitable, and I'd lose the only piece of Emma I had left." The thought had honestly never occurred to me until he said it, but now that he had, I couldn't deny it would have been my first instinct 3 years ago. To take control, to assert my rights as the grandfather, to ensure this child was raised with all the advantages my name could provide, to remove her from this working-class mechanic and place her in the world where she belonged, the world of country clubs and private schools and trust funds, and I would have destroyed Daniel Cooper in the process, would have seen it as necessary collateral damage in securing my granddaughter's future. Is this really who I'd become? When had I turned into this person who valued status over love, control over trust, appearances over authenticity? I looked at Lily, really looked at her. Her clothes were clean but clearly well worn, probably hand-me-downs or thrift store finds. Her shoes were scuffed but functional. Her hair was brushed and tied back with a simple elastic band, not the expensive designer children's clothes I could provide. But she was smiling as she played, completely content, secure in the knowledge that the man standing above her loved her unconditionally. She wasn't lacking for anything that truly mattered. She had love, attention, stability, and a father who brought her to her mother's grave to keep Emma's memory alive. What more could any child need? "I'm not going to try to take her from you," I heard myself say, the words coming from some place deeper than conscious thought. "I've made enough mistakes with my daughter. I won't repeat them with my granddaughter." Daniel's eyes widened in surprise, clearly not expecting that response. "Mr. Harrington, But I am asking," I continued, "if you would let me be part of her life. Let me know her. Let her know me. Let me try to be the grandfather Emma would have wanted me to be, not the one I would have been 3 years ago." The silence stretched between us, broken only by Lily's humming and the distant sound of wind chimes from somewhere in the cemetery. Daniel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, studying my face as if trying to determine whether I was sincere or whether this was some kind of manipulation. "I need to think about it," he finally said. "Lily's life has been stable for 2 years now, and I won't disrupt that unless I'm absolutely certain it's in her best interest. I won't let anyone hurt her, not even her grandfather." The fact that he didn't trust me stung, but I couldn't fault him for it. I hadn't given Emma reason to trust me with her truth, so why would he trust me with her daughter? "I understand," I said. "Take whatever time you need. But Daniel, please understand something. I lost my daughter because I was too busy trying to control her life to actually see her, to listen to her, to accept her for who she really was. I've spent 3 years in a hell of my own making, grieving not just for Emma but for all the moments I wasted, all the conversations we didn't have because I was too busy telling her what to do instead of asking her what she needed. I can't get those years back with Emma, but I'm being given an impossible second chance with Lily. I'm begging you not to let my past mistakes steal my future too." Something in my words must have resonated with him because his expression softened slightly. "Emma loved you," he said quietly. "Even when she was frustrated with you, even when she was hiding from you, she loved you. She used to tell me stories about when she was little, how you'd take her to the park every Saturday morning, just the two of you, and push her on the swings until your arms were tired. She said those were her favorite memories, before you got so consumed with building the business, before everything became about appearances and expectations. She said she missed the dad who cared more about her happiness than her achievements." The words hit me like a freight train, because I remembered those Saturday mornings too. They'd been sacred to me, a time when I could just be a dad, not a businessman or a provider or a social climber. Just a man pushing his giggling daughter on a swing set, listening to her talk about her week, her friends, her dreams. When had I stopped making time for those mornings? When had the business breakfasts and the golf games with clients become more important than those simple moments with Emma? I stopped going, I whispered, more to myself than to Daniel. She got older, started middle school, and I told myself she was too old for the playground, that she'd rather spend time with her friends. But that wasn't really it. I'd gotten a big account, was expanding the business, and Saturday mornings became convenient for meetings with West Coast clients in different time zones. I chose work over her. I chose money and success over my daughter. Have you ever looked back at your life and seen the exact moment when you took a wrong turn, when you made a choice that sent you down a path you never meant to travel? Share in the comments if you've ever had that crushing realization of opportunities missed and priorities misplaced because standing in that cemetery, I was drowning in them. Lily suddenly stood up and walked over to Daniel, tugging on his jacket. "Daddy, I'm cold," she said, and indeed the November air had taken on a sharper chill as the afternoon wore on. Daniel immediately shrugged off his jacket and wrapped it around her small shoulders. The gesture was so natural, so instinctive, so full of tenderness that I felt another wave of shame. This man, whom I would have dismissed as unsuitable for my daughter, was raising her child with more love and attention than I'd given Emma in her final years. "We should go," Daniel said, lifting Lily into his arms. She rested her head on his shoulder, her eyes drooping with the sudden exhaustion that small children experience. "I have to get her home for her nap, and then I have an evening shift at the shop." He started to walk past me, and I felt panic rising in my chest. I couldn't let them leave. Couldn't let this moment end with nothing resolved, nothing settled. "Wait," I said desperately. "Please, can I at least give you my card? My personal number. You don't have to call me. But if you change your mind, if Lily ever needs anything, or if you just decide you're willing to let me try to be part of her life, you'll know how to reach me." Daniel hesitated, then nodded slowly. I pulled out my wallet with shaking hands and extracted one of my business cards, but instead of handing it to him, I pulled out a pen and crossed out my office number, writing my personal cell phone number on the back. "This is my cell," I said. "I answer it day or night. I'll wait as long as it takes, Daniel. But please, I'm begging you, don't deny me the chance to know my granddaughter. Don't let my past mistakes with Emma determine Lily's future." He took the card, studied it for a moment, then slipped it into his pocket. "I'll think about it," he repeated, and then he was walking away, carrying my granddaughter toward the parking area, leaving me standing alone beside my daughter's tomb. I sank down onto the marble bench beside Emma's grave, my legs no longer able to support me. The weight of everything I'd learned, everything I'd lost, everything I might still lose, was crushing. "I'm so sorry, Emma," I whispered to the stone that marked where my daughter's body rested. "I'm so sorry I wasn't the father you needed. I'm so sorry you felt you had to hide the most important things in your life from me. I'm so sorry you died thinking I'd be disappointed in you, when the truth is I was never worthy of you in the first place. You were everything good and pure and real, and I tried to mold you into something else, something that fit my image of what you should be instead of celebrating who you actually were." The tears came harder now, great racking sobs that shook my entire body. For 3 years I'd grieved Emma's death, but sitting there in that cemetery, I was grieving something else too. I was grieving the relationship we could have had if I'd been a different kind of father. I was grieving the trust I'd destroyed and the secrets she'd felt forced to keep. I was grieving the granddaughter I might never know because I'd so thoroughly failed her mother. I don't know how long I sat there. The sun moved lower in the sky, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. Other visitors came and went, giving me a wide berth, probably assuming I was just another mourner having a difficult day. If only they knew the half of it. Finally, as the cemetery workers began making their rounds to remind people of closing time, I forced myself to stand. My joints ached, whether from sitting too long in the cold, or from the sudden aging that seemed to have occurred in the space of one afternoon, I couldn't say. I placed my hand on Emma's tomb, feeling the cold marble beneath my palm. "I promise you, sweetheart," I whispered, "if I get the chance to know Lily, I'll be different. I'll be the grandfather you would have wanted for her. I'll love her for who she is, not who I think she should be. I'll listen more than I talk. I'll accept more than I judge. I'll be the man I should have been for you. Please, if you have any influence wherever you are, help Daniel see that I mean it. Help me get this second chance I don't deserve, but desperately need." The drive home was a blur. I found myself at my house, a sprawling estate that had always seemed like the pinnacle of success but now just felt empty and cold, without any memory of the actual journey. Catherine's car was in the driveway, which meant she was home from her charity board meeting. I sat in my car for several minutes trying to figure out how to tell her what I'd learned. How do you walk into your home and tell your wife that your dead daughter had a child neither of you knew existed? How do you explain that you'd been so controlling, so unapproachable, that your own daughter chose to hide her pregnancy, and the man she loved rather than trust you with the truth? I finally forced myself to go inside. Catherine was in the living room, going through papers from her meeting. She looked up when I entered, and her smile faded immediately. "Richard, what's wrong? You look terrible. Are you ill?" I sat down heavily in the chair across from her and the words just spilled out. All of it. The man at Emma's grave. The little girl with Emma's eyes. The story Daniel had told. The daughter I'd failed so completely that she'd died thinking I'd disown her for choosing love over status. Catherine's face went through a transformation as I spoke. Shock, disbelief, pain, anger, grief, all flickering across her features in rapid succession. When I finished, she was crying, but she was also looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "We have a granddaughter," she whispered. "Emma had a baby, and we have a granddaughter." "Yes," I said. "Her name is Lily. She's 2 years old, and she looks exactly like Emma did at that age. It's uncanny, Catherine, like seeing a ghost, but a beautiful, living ghost." "And this man, Daniel, he's been raising her alone for 2 years?" Catherine asked, her voice stronger now. "He didn't tell us, didn't ask for help or money or anything?" "Emma made him promise not to contact us," I said, the shame burning fresh all over again. "She was afraid of how we'd react, afraid we'd try to take the baby away from him or destroy him for not being good enough for her. And God help me, Catherine, she was probably right to be afraid. 3 years ago, that's exactly what I would have done." Catherine was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded in her lap. When she finally looked up at me, there was a determination in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. "Then we need to prove her wrong," she said firmly. "We need to show this young man that we're not the people Emma feared we were. Or rather, that we don't have to be those people anymore. Richard, I've spent 3 years in a fog of grief, going through the motions of living without really being alive. But hearing that there's a piece of Emma still in this world, a little girl who carries her genes and her spirit, it's like someone just turned on a light in a room I thought would be dark forever." I looked at my wife, really looked at her for the first time in months, maybe years. She'd lost weight, I noticed. There were streaks of gray in her hair that she'd stopped bothering to color, lines around her eyes that spoke of tears and sleepless nights. We'd been living in the same house but existing in separate worlds, each drowning in our own grief with no energy left to reach for each other. "What do we do?" I asked her. He said he needed time to think about whether to let us into Lily's life. He doesn't trust us, and I can't blame him for that. Catherine stood up and began pacing, her mind clearly working through the problem the way she used to tackle the complex social and logistical challenges of the various charities she chaired. "We show him through our actions, not our words," she said. "We don't pressure him. We don't use our money or influence to force the situation. We wait, and while we wait, we work on becoming the kind of people who deserve to be in that little girl's life." "How?" I asked, feeling lost. "Catherine, I've spent 30 years building a reputation as a ruthless businessman. I've made enemies, crushed competitors, prioritized profit over people. How do I undo that? How do I become someone different?" She stopped pacing and looked at me with an expression that was both sad and hopeful. "You start by examining why you made those choices in the first place," she said gently. "Richard, I've known you since we were in college. I fell in love with a young man who was ambitious, yes, but also kind and idealistic. You wanted to build something not just to be wealthy, but to prove that a kid from a working-class neighborhood could make it, could be someone. But somewhere along the way, proving yourself became controlling everything. Success became about dominance rather than achievement. You didn't just want to be successful. You wanted to be untouchable, unquestionable, above everyone else." Her words stung because they were true. I had come from nothing, had clawed my way up from a childhood of poverty and instability. My father had been a drunk who couldn't hold a job. My mother had worked 3 jobs to keep us fed. I'd sworn I'd be different, that I'd build something stable and secure, that my children would never know the uncertainty and shame I'd experienced. But I'd taken it too far. I hadn't just wanted to provide stability. I'd wanted to control every variable, eliminate every risk, ensure that nothing and no one could ever threaten the empire I'd built, including my own daughter's choices. I need to change, I said quietly. But Catherine, I don't even know where to start. She came and sat beside me, taking my hand in hers for the first time in longer than I could remember. We start by being honest with ourselves about our failures, she said. And we start by accepting that we can't control the outcome with Daniel and Lily. All we can do is work on ourselves and hope that when and if we get the chance, we'll be ready to be the grandparents Lily deserves. The next few weeks were the longest of my life. I went to work, attended meetings, made decisions, but my heart wasn't in it. My mind was constantly on that little girl I'd met so briefly in the cemetery. I found myself wondering what she was doing, whether she was happy, whether Daniel was managing okay on his own, whether she ever asked questions about her mother. I started seeing a therapist, something I would have scoffed at 3 years ago as a waste of time and money. Dr. Brennan was patient with me as I unpacked decades of issues, controlling behaviors, and the deep-seated fear of vulnerability that had driven so much of my life. You equated love with control, she explained during one session. If you could control the variables in your daughter's life, you could keep her safe, keep her on the path you believed was right. But that's not love, Richard. That's fear masquerading as protection. I reduced my hours at work, delegating more to my VP and spending time on things I'd neglected for years. I started volunteering at a youth center in a working-class neighborhood, not unlike the one where I'd grown up. I wanted to understand the world that Daniel came from, the world that Emma had apparently found more authentic and meaningful than the one Catherine and I had created for her. I reconnected with old friends from my childhood, people I'd left behind as I'd climbed the social ladder, people who remembered the boy I'd been before ambition and insecurity had hardened me into someone I barely recognized anymore. Catherine threw herself into similar work. She started volunteering at a NICU, holding premature babies who needed human touch while their parents couldn't be there around the clock. She told me it helped her feel connected to Lily, imagining what those first precarious months must have been like for our granddaughter fighting for every breath. We started talking again, really talking, not just exchanging pleasantries or coordinating schedules. We talked about Emma, about our grief, about our mistakes. We cried together, sometimes for hours. We began slowly rebuilding the relationship that had been dying long before Emma's death had delivered the final blow. And every day I hoped my phone would ring, that Daniel would call and tell me he'd decided to give me a chance. But the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into a month, and the silence continued. Have you ever wanted something so badly that every day without it felt like an eternity? Comment below if you've ever experienced that kind of desperate hope mixed with paralyzing fear that what you want most might never happen. It was December 23rd, almost Christmas, when my phone finally rang at 11 o'clock at night. I was in my study, unable to sleep, looking at the album of Emma's childhood photos that I'd pulled out, studying pictures of her at 2 years old, seeing Lily's face in every image. The number was unknown, but I answered immediately. "Hello?" I said, my heart pounding. "Mr. Harrington, it's Daniel Cooper." His voice sounded strained, worried. "I'm sorry to call so late, but I didn't know what else to do." "What's wrong?" I asked, already standing up, my mind racing through terrible possibilities. "Is Lily okay?" "She's in the hospital," Daniel said, and I could hear the barely controlled panic in his voice. "She spiked a fever this afternoon and it kept climbing. I took her to the emergency room and they admitted her. They're saying it might be pneumonia, which is especially dangerous for her because of her history. Her lungs have always been weak from being born so premature. They're running tests, giving her antibiotics and oxygen, but Mr. Harrington, I'm terrified. She looks so small in that hospital bed, and I keep thinking about how I almost lost her when she was born, and I just can't go through that again." "Which hospital?" I asked, already grabbing my coat. "St. Mary's," he said. "But Mr. Harrington, I'm not calling to ask you to come. I'm calling because my insurance, it's basic coverage through my job, and they're saying that if Lily needs to be transferred to a specialist pediatric hospital, or if she needs certain treatments, I'm going to be looking at bills I can't pay. And I hate myself for calling you. Hate that I'm doing exactly what I promised myself I wouldn't do. But she's my daughter, and I'll do anything for her, including swallowing my pride and asking the man Emma was afraid of for help." "I'm on my way," I said. "And Daniel, you did the right thing calling me. Whatever Lily needs, whatever it costs, she'll get it. I'll make sure of it. I can't pay you back, he said, his voice cracking. Not anytime soon. Probably not ever, actually. I'm not asking you to, I said, already heading for the door. She's my granddaughter. This is what grandparents do. I woke Catherine, explained the situation, and within 15 minutes we were in the car speeding toward St. Mary's Hospital. Catherine was on the phone with our family physician, who was calling in favors and getting information about the best pediatric pulmonologist in the state. We arrived at the hospital to find Daniel in the waiting area outside the pediatric ward. He looked haggard, exhausted, his hair disheveled and his eyes red. When he saw us, he stood up, and I could see he was trembling. They let me see her a few minutes ago, he said. She's sleeping, the medications are making her drowsy, but she's breathing easier than she was. They think they caught it early enough. Can we see her? Catherine asked, her voice gentle but urgent. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. She doesn't know who you are, he warned. If she wakes up and sees strangers, she might be scared. We'll be quiet, I promised. We just need to see her. He led us down the hallway to a small room where Lily was sleeping in a hospital bed that seemed enormous for such a tiny person. She had an oxygen cannula in her nose and an IV in her little hand. Her dark curls were spread across the pillow, and even in sleep I could see Emma's features in her face. Catherine gasped softly beside me, her hand flying to her mouth. I knew she was seeing what I saw. Our daughter reborn in this precious child who was fighting her own battle just as Emma had fought hers in the end. We stood there for a long time, just watching Lily breathe. The steady rise and fall of her small chest, the soft beeping of the monitors, the medicinal smell of the hospital. It all brought back terrible memories of those final hours with Emma. But this time was different. This time, we were here at the beginning of the crisis, not at the end. This time, there was hope. I've been thinking about your offer, Daniel said quietly, not looking at us, his eyes fixed on his daughter. About being part of her life. I've been stubborn about it, protective, maybe even vindictive if I'm honest. I told myself I was protecting Lily, but maybe I was also punishing you for how you treated Emma. But sitting here tonight, terrified that I might lose her, I realized something. I'm not enough on my own. I love her with everything I have, but love isn't always enough. She deserves more than just me struggling to make ends meet. More than basic insurance that makes me hesitate before calling an ambulance. More than one person who would be completely lost if something happened to me. He turned to look at us then, tears streaming down his face. Emma told me once that despite everything, despite all the ways you frustrated her and tried to control her life, you loved her fiercely. She said she'd never doubted that. She just wished you'd loved her for who she was instead of who you wanted her to be. Can you do that with Lily? Can you love her without trying to take over her life or mine? Can you be her grandparents without trying to buy her or control how I raise her? Yes, Catherine said immediately, her own tears flowing freely. I promise you, Daniel, we can. We want to. We've spent the last 6 weeks working on ourselves, trying to become the kind of people who deserve to be in Lily's life. We know we have a lot to prove to you, and we're willing to do whatever it takes. I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady. Daniel studied us for a long moment, then made a decision that would change all our lives. Okay, he said simply. Okay, but we do this on my terms. I'm still her father. I still make the final decisions about her life. You can be her grandparents, you can help when help is needed, but you don't get to take over. Is that clear? Completely clear, I said. And Daniel, I want you to know something. You're exactly the kind of father Emma would have wanted for her daughter. You're exactly what I should have been for Emma. Patient, present, focused on her well-being instead of your own ego. I have a lot to learn from you, and I'm willing to learn if you're willing to teach. Something shifted in Daniel's expression then. Not complete trust, not yet, but maybe the beginning of a possibility that we could find a way forward together. Lily stirred in her sleep, making a small sound, and Daniel was immediately at her bedside, smoothing her hair back from her forehead with a gentleness that made my heart ache. Daddy's here, sweetheart, he whispered. You're going to be okay. You're going to be fine. Catherine and I stayed at that hospital all night and through the next day. We brought Daniel coffee and food, sat with him during the long hours of waiting, and met with doctors to discuss Lily's treatment plan. We called in specialists, not to override Daniel's decisions, but to give him the best information possible so he could make informed choices. When Lily woke up, still groggy from medication, she looked at us with those familiar green eyes, and Catherine began to cry all over again. "Who are you?" Lily asked in her small voice. Daniel looked at us and I nodded, giving him permission to tell her whatever he felt was right. "Lily, sweetheart, these are your grandparents," Daniel said gently. "Your mama's parents. They came to visit you because they love you very much." Lily processed this for a moment. "Like Grandma Cooper?" she asked, referring to Daniel's mother. "Exactly like Grandma Cooper," Daniel said. "Except these grandparents are from your mama's family." Lily seemed to accept this easily, the way children do without the complicated adult emotions attached to it. "Okay," she said, then looked at Catherine. "You look like my mama in the picture." Catherine let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "You look like your mama too, sweetheart. So much." We stayed until Lily was released from the hospital 2 days later, her pneumonia responding well to treatment. We insisted on paying all the medical bills, and while Daniel was clearly uncomfortable with it, he accepted with a grace that spoke volumes about his character. He understood that sometimes accepting help isn't about weakness. It's about doing what's best for the people you love. Christmas that year was different than any Christmas we'd had in 3 years. Different than any we'd had in much longer than that, actually. Catherine and I asked Daniel and Lily to spend Christmas Day with us, and after some hesitation he agreed. We kept it simple, nothing over the top or overwhelming. Just a family dinner, some modest gifts for Lily, and time together. Watching Lily tear into wrapping paper with the unbridled joy that only a 2-year-old can have, hearing her squeals of delight over a stuffed bunny Catherine had bought her, seeing her crawl into Daniel's lap to show him each new treasure, it was the best gift we could have received. We were there. We were present. We were being given a second chance we'd never dared to hope for. Over the following months, we built a relationship slowly, carefully. Daniel brought Lily to visit us twice a month. We attended her 3rd birthday party at Daniel's modest apartment, surrounded by his family and friends, people who had supported him through the hardest years of his life. We fit ourselves into their world instead of demanding they fit into ours. I got to know Daniel beyond that first painful conversation in the cemetery. He was intelligent, thoughtful, and deeply principled. He read voraciously, everything from philosophy to classic literature. He volunteered at a literacy program in his neighborhood. He was teaching Lily about kindness, empathy, and the value of treating every person with respect, regardless of their circumstances. Everything I'd failed to teach Emma, he was teaching her daughter. Catherine and I supported him in ways that respected his independence. We set up a trust fund for Lily's education, but Daniel maintained full control over when and how it was used. We offered to help with daycare costs so Daniel could reduce his second job hours and spend more time with Lily, and he accepted after we framed it as something we would have done for Emma if we'd known. We never used our money as leverage or control. It was simply a resource we had that could make their lives easier, and we offered it with no strings attached. I learned to ask instead of tell. "Would you like some help with that?" Instead of, "This is what you should do." I learned to listen to Daniel's perspective even when it differed from what I would have chosen. I learned that there are many right ways to raise a child, and my way wasn't the only valid one. Catherine developed a special bond with Lily, taking her to the park every Saturday morning, echoing those precious times I'd once had with Emma. She would come home glowing, telling me about the games they'd played, the questions Lily had asked, the way she'd laughed when the ducks at the pond splashed water on them. We talked about Emma with Lily, keeping her memory alive in age-appropriate ways. We showed her pictures, told her stories about what her mother was like as a child, made sure she knew that Emma had loved her, even though she'd never gotten to hold her. One afternoon when Lily was almost 4, she climbed into my lap while we were looking at photo albums together. She pointed to a picture of Emma at her age. "That's my mama when she was little like me," she said. "Yes, sweetheart," I confirmed. "She was beautiful and smart and kind, just like you're going to be." Lily was quiet for a moment, then looked up at me with those impossibly green eyes. "Daddy says Mama watches me from heaven. Do you think she's happy I got you and Grandma?" The question hit me with unexpected force. Was Emma happy? Could she see what we were doing? How we were trying to be different, to be better? I'd like to think so. I'd like to think that wherever she is, Emma knows we finally understand what she tried to tell us, that we finally learned the lessons she died trying to teach us. "I think your mama is very happy," I told Lily, my voice thick with emotion. "I think she's proud of what a wonderful little girl you're becoming, and I think she's glad that we all have each other." Lily seemed satisfied with this answer and went back to looking at pictures, her small finger tracing Emma's face in photograph after photograph. I held my granddaughter close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, feeling the weight and warmth of her in my arms, and thanking whatever forces in the universe had brought Daniel to Emma's grave that November day. I thought about the man I'd been 3 years ago, the man who would have seen a working-class mechanic crying at his daughter's grave and immediately assumed the worst. The man who would have investigated, threatened, used every resource at his disposal to take control of the situation. That man would have destroyed the delicate, beautiful family that was forming between us. That man would have lost everything that now mattered most. I'd spent most of my life building an empire, accumulating wealth, chasing success and prestige. I'd believed those things were important, that they were what gave life meaning and purpose. But sitting there with my granddaughter in my lap, knowing that her father trusted me enough to let me be part of her life, understanding that I was being given a precious opportunity to get it right this time, I realized that everything I'd chased for all those years was worthless compared to this connection, this love, this family that had been broken and was slowly, carefully being rebuilt. Daniel eventually moved to a better apartment in a safer neighborhood, but he refused to let us buy him a house. "I need to stand on my own feet," he explained. "I need Lily to see me working for what we have, earning our way, not because your help isn't appreciated, but because I want her to understand the value of independence and self-sufficiency too." I respected that even though I didn't fully agree. But I'd learned that respecting someone means accepting their choices even when you choose differently. Catherine and I revised our wills, setting up provisions for Lily that would be administered by Daniel with input from independent trustees. We wanted to ensure she'd always be financially secure, but we structured it in a way that protected Daniel's authority as her father and prevented anyone from using money to manipulate or control her future. As Lily grew older, she began asking more questions about her mother. Daniel handled these conversations beautifully, always age-appropriately, always honestly, and increasingly, he invited Catherine and me to participate in these talks, letting us share our memories of Emma, creating a fuller picture of who her mother had been. When Lily was 5, we all took a trip to the cemetery together on what would have been Emma's 30th birthday. Lily placed flowers on the tomb, as she'd done many times before, but this time she said something that made all of us cry. "I'm glad you sent Daddy to Grandpa that day, Mama," she said to the stone, "because now we're all a family, and even though I miss you, I have so many people who love me because of you." Out of the mouths of babes comes the deepest wisdom. This child, born from tragedy, fighting against impossible odds to survive, had somehow become the glue that bonded our broken pieces back together. Not perfectly. There would always be scars, always be regrets, always be the aching absence of Emma. But we were healing. We were growing. We were becoming better versions of ourselves because a little girl with her mother's eyes needed us to be. I looked at Daniel, this man I'd once thought wasn't good enough for my daughter, and felt nothing but profound respect and gratitude. He could have kept Lily from us out of spite or fear. He could have raised her to resent us, to blame us for Emma's choices and her tragic end. Instead, he'd found the strength and grace to let us prove ourselves, to earn our place in his daughter's life, to become the family that Emma had hoped we could all be together. "Thank you," I said to him quietly as we walked back to our cars, Lily skipping ahead of us chasing butterflies, "for giving me this chance, for trusting me with her, for being the man Emma loved, and the father she would have wanted for her daughter." Daniel smiled, the kind of genuine smile that reaches the eyes and softens the whole face. "Emma used to say that people aren't defined by their worst moments but by whether they're willing to acknowledge them and do better. You've done better, Mr. Harrington, both of you have." "Richard," I corrected him gently. "Please call me Richard. We're family now." And we were. Not a conventional family, not without complications, but a real family nonetheless. Built not on blood alone, but on choice, effort, forgiveness, and the determination to honor Emma's memory by being the people she'd needed us to be all along. Looking back now, I can see that finding Daniel and Lily at Emma's grave wasn't an accident or a coincidence. It was a gift, perhaps the last gift Emma could give us. A chance to see what our control and expectations had cost us. A chance to meet the man who had loved our daughter for exactly who she was, without trying to change her. A chance to know the granddaughter who carried Emma's spirit forward into the world. A chance to become better people. I still visit Emma's grave every Sunday, but now I'm not always alone. Sometimes Catherine comes with me. Sometimes Daniel brings Lily. Sometimes we all go together. And instead of just talking about my regrets and failures, I tell Emma about her daughter, about the funny thing Lily said that week, about how well she's doing in kindergarten, about how much she loves to read just like Emma did, about how she has Emma's compassionate heart and stubborn determination. I tell Emma that we're taking care of her baby girl, that we're not perfect, that we still make mistakes, but we're trying. Every day we're trying to be worthy of the second chance we've been given. The wealthy father who found a stranger weeping at his daughter's tomb learned the hardest lesson of his life that day. He learned that love cannot be controlled, that relationships cannot be managed like business deals, that the most valuable things in life cannot be bought or accumulated or displayed as trophies. He learned that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what truly matters. He learned that it's never too late to change, never too late to admit you were wrong, never too late to become the person you should have been all along. But most importantly, he learned that when a child's face tells you all you need to know, you should listen. Those green eyes that matched his daughter's weren't just showing him a physical resemblance. They were showing him a path forward, a way out of the darkness of grief and regret, a reason to be better. Sometimes our greatest losses lead to our most important transformations. Sometimes tragedy opens doors we didn't know existed. Sometimes a stranger holding a child at a cemetery can change your entire life. So I'm asking you now, have you ever been given a second chance you didn't deserve? Have you ever had someone forgive you when you hadn't fully forgiven yourself? Have you ever looked at your life and realized that everything you thought mattered was actually just noise distracting you from what was truly important? Share your stories in the comments below. Tell me about your own moments of realization, your own journeys from control to connection, your own struggles to become better than you were. Because these stories, these testimonies of human growth and redemption, they matter. They remind us that we're all capable of change, all worthy of forgiveness, all able to build something beautiful from the rubble of our mistakes. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about your own relationships or your own priorities, please hit that like button. It helps us share these important messages with more people who might need to hear them. Subscribe to Through My Eyes for more stories about real human experiences, about loss and love, about failure and redemption, about the complicated, messy, beautiful reality of being human in this world. And don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss a story that might change your perspective or touch your soul the way I hope this one has. Remember, it's never too late to change. It's never too late to admit you were wrong. It's never too late to become the person your loved ones needed you to be. And sometimes, just sometimes, life gives us the extraordinary gift of a second chance to get it right. Don't waste yours the way I almost wasted mine. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this journey, and thank you for reminding me through your presence and your attention that sharing our most painful truths can lead to our deepest healing.